Paul Auwaerter with Medscape Infectious Diseases. Is piperacillin-tazobactam nephrotoxic? It's a question which I think came up repeatedly during my last 2 weeks on our ID consultation service in hospital, especially among house staff and advanced level practitioners. Let's give a little bit of a backstory. Over a decade ago, the FDA placed warnings in the prescribing information for Zosyn about the fact that its use in critically ill patients can impact renal function and suggested using alternative agents. They also warned that about combining it with vancomycin because of the risk of increased acute kidney injury. Some of this was based on an over 1,200 person trial indicating about a 70% increased risk of renal failure compared to other beta-lactam drugs. So what's happened in the ensuing decade, especially for more ill patients or those with some baseline renal abnormalities, are cefepime, cephalosporin became the favored drug when you needed gram-negative coverage, and use of piperacillin-tazobactam declined. However, I would say the warning has always been a bit controversial because before that study was performed, piperacillin, like any beta-lactam, can rarely cause acute interstitial nephritis, but it is rare and generally wasn't considered nephrotoxic. But a whole bunch of Me Too studies that were often observational or retrospective seemed to confirm this particular problem, and therefore helped reinforce the point of view that piperacillin-tazobactam could be nephrotoxic. However, there's really no biological basis for this, and investigations in recent years have found that piperacillin-tazobactam, when it hits the kidney, tends to impact and use OAT3. This is an organic ion transporter in the proximal tubule, and it uses this much more than other hydrophilic beta-lactams such as carbapenems or cephalosporins. This can cause some extra stress to those cells and therefore often see some competition with serum creatinine, and hence may see a reflection of a rise in serum levels. But studies hadn't generally found that there's any worse outcomes with this, such as dialysis. So the thought was perhaps this just means that piperacillin is competing with creatinine for transportation through this OAT3 transporter and doesn't really reflect real renal injury. A paper last year looked at some 700 plus ICU patients who either got vancomycin and Zosyn or vancomycin and cefepime, and found that the group that got the vancomycin and the piperacillin-tazobactam did have what was called a creatinine-defined acute kidney injury, but had no change in associated alternative kidney biomarkers such as cystatin C, which is actually more accurate. Also, there was no increased risk of mortality or dialysis. So this all supports the hypothesis that pip-tazo really, its effect on creatinine reflects pseudotoxicity. So, just recently in JAMA, a trial called ACORN tried to address whether, in a prospective randomized fashion, whether piperacillin-tazobactam injures the kidney. And they looked at over 2,500 patients that received that drug or needed piperacillin-tazobactam within 12 hours of hitting the emergency room or needing ICU care. And this was randomized between that drug and cefepime. And what they found at day 14, there was no difference in the primary outcome of kidney injury or death. However, there are a number of limitations to this study. It was unblinded. There was no knowledge of premorbid creatinine levels. 20% of people got other drugs, of course, like vancomycin. And actually, the patients only received on average 3 days of either drug, arguing that perhaps they weren't very ill or they had alternative explanations and also piperacillin-tazobactam was given by extended infusion. All this is to say that the hopes for a definitive trial to help answer this question, I think, is perhaps not the ACORN study. But regardless, what I've been trying to explain both to our infectious disease fellows, our house staff, medical students, and APPs are that really piperacillin-tazobactam, if there is a rise in creatinine, is unlikely to have any clear impact on a patient. Of course, vancomycin is known to cause interstitial renal disease and certainly can, with higher doses, cause problems. So that combination might see somewhat higher serum creatinine than you would if only using vancomycin in of itself, but again, isn't something that I think really impacts my decision whether to use piperacillin-tazobactam or not. So I hope in conclusion that instead of always reaching for cefepime, which of course has its own problems in especially elderly population with encephalopathy, that you still might write for piperacillin-tazobactam when it's appropriate for your patients. And of course, I think until this warning is removed, it will remain ingrained in many aspects of our patient care. Thanks so much.